Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. Hello, this is Adam Huss coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Thanks so much for listening. I want to start by addressing the fact that I'm releasing this episode during a time when the unprecedented nature of world events makes discussing anything else seem trivial. I love wine, but at times it feels incredibly decadent to indulge in the luxury of drinking and thinking about wine in the face of the enormous amount of suffering and injustice in the world. Actually, that's why this podcast is really about much more than wine, and wine every episode I hope to open a door, even just a crack, on a better world. But in honor of this time and the history that is being made right now, I want to say this. Wine loves peace. Wine can only happen when we can freely and safely care for our vineyards through the seasons, ferment our grapes with care, and allow the wine to rest quietly at peace through more seasons. Wine is the delicious abundance that flows from peace. And I don't want to think of peace as a luxury. I don't want to live in that kind of world. So today, this episode is my wish or prayer or incantation for wine and peace for the whole world. My guest for this episode is Darek Trowbridge. Darek is the mind and body behind Old World Winery. He refers to himself as a soil farmer rather than a grape farmer, and this earth-first approach has led him to coin the term Pastoral Winemaker, because Darek has been making natural wine since before anyone called it natural wine. That's right. Darek is a true pioneer and OG in the natural wine movement from the 90s, and he has a wealth of incredible information to share from over 25 years. Probably much more than 25 years of regenerating vineyard ecosystems and shepherding wine. We talk about exactly how he does this, bringing vineyards planted in the 1800s back to vibrant vitality by building soil carbon. Darek has multiple degrees in the science of vineyards and winemaking, and he provides so many practical nuggets of wisdom throughout this interview. He talks about using sesame oil as his only fungicide, farming the only Abouriou vineyard in the New World, and how he is helping Sonoma County reduce wildfire risk while regenerating soil health with proprietary woodchip compost through his soil carbon management company. Darek is someone who has bucked the trends and just kept making farming first wine for decades. And because of that, he probably hasn't gotten the attention he deserves. So it's a real pleasure to introduce you to the beautiful work that he's doing. Enjoy. Darek, welcome. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Right on. Thanks, Adam. Appreciate you having me.
So absolutely. I would like to just start with Old World Winery, and that's your winery, right?
Yes. Yep.
You call yourself a pastoral winemaker. Can you start with that?
Well,
what does that mean to you?
That's great. So, that was an attempt to bring, so this is all coming from, I started Old World Winery back in 1998. At that time, there was no natural wine. It was out there. Of course, it was available, but there was no term necessarily natural wine
right.
to sell under, which, for better or worse, of course, that term brings a lot of conversation, should we say, but if you're selling a product in that line, then it's really helpful for the discussion. Back in 1998, I didn't have that help. And the way I tried to bring it, because we couldn't say organic wine then, because
right.
Organic wine was kind of got a black eye, in the 80s. And so I didn't really want to say that. And natural wine wasn't an idea yet. And so I just said Old World. It came from my grandfather to my great-grandfather to me from the Old World, from Italy. So that's kind of like the beginnings. Sorry, now I thought of a whole litany of other stuff to say. What was the main question you had for?
Well, no, I want that whole litany of other stuff as well. I mean, I will. What I was asking about was the pastoral winemaker, but it is important, I think, to point out how long you've been at this. Like, I mean, there was like you and Couturi, who maybe was around at that
and,
point, and that was about it,
and
you know,
Fry.
in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, and
Uh,
Fry was around, but
Fry, right? But were they were? Oh, I guess yeah. Of course, they were doing zero sulfur, right? They were.
yeah,
They
and
yeah.
so there were two, love those wines. There were two sort of factions, and the sommeliers didn't love them, and
Right.
that's so I didn't go that route necessarily, but that all of that is the story, and Pastoral Winemaker is kind of at the pinnacle. It's right in the middle because the desire for making natural wine comes from the desire to make natural grapes, and of course that's first. And I have 35 years of farming experience, so that goes back deep. My winery I've had for like 24 years, 23, and so when I was trying to explain all this to people in a way that they could care about, because a lot of them would be like, all wine's natural. I don't care. What are you talking about? And so there was a lot of that backlash, and so the conversation couldn't even really come, where I wanted it to go. And honestly, I've always said that everybody, as of sometime around 2005, organic food became a household name, right? I mean, the Organic
Right.
Food Act was 1991. And it wasn't until 10 years later that we actually had the NOP, the National Organic
Program, right?
program. And thank you. And so, that from there, then we had Whole Foods make it, popularize it and reach people with it. And then it was instantly, it felt like in 4 years, it was just a household word. Natural wine doesn't have that. I mean, natural wine's more like 20 years behind organic food. So when I'm going out in 1998, people are not receiving the message. They think it's natural and they think I'm full of it. And so, how do you bring the nature? How do you bring the farm into the wine? And that's for me the term pastoral. I really liked it because the pastoral setting is usually, the shepherd. I shepherd my wines. I really like the
Mm.
term, but it just created more confusion. People thought I was a pastor. I said, well, maybe I should have gone that route, but darn it, didn't. So I ended up dropping it, I don't know, a few years ago, whatever. Now I just say, farmer, winemaker, owner, or that's my title. And, and that seems to work for the moment.
I love that. Well, I mean, just because I'm curious about these things,
Yeah.
what other kinds of observations do you have from this perspective of having seen the rise of the natural wine movement, and and far before that as well, like
Yeah.
like you said,
You know,
back to when organic wine got a bad rep, and
right?
the rise of the organic wine movement, and that preceded natural wine. Yeah, what insights, and not just what insights do you have from your perspective, like how do you well, I'll have follow-up questions, but one is like, what insights do you have? I'm just going to lay it out. This is a 5-part
I
question.
appreciate that. Yeah.
Um,
You may have to remind
one
me
is like,
along the way.
I like insights from your perspective,
Yeah.
about, especially about some of the things that have become controversial or become
Yep.
hot takes and
Yep.
hot topics.
Yep.
But then also just, how do you find that messaging? How have you found a way to navigate that messaging through all of this time in a way that allows you to continue to repeat it without feeling jaded? Or how have you maintained sort of telling that story repeatedly, and and reaching people with it, but also, I don't know, like, do you get bored saying the same thing over and over again? You know what I
Oh,
mean? Like, it's,
hell yeah. I mean,
okay.
I think that's why, a lot, many of us just don't like going to the, I mean, you kind of need the big shows. I love Isabelle Legeron. I love Raw. But it's a hard thing for me to do. I'm usually there by myself, and you're just talking fast, and, as many times as you can say the same thing. That's part of the job, right? But,
Yeah.
and in some instances, it's a real pleasure and a privilege to be there to offer, my story to people. And so, but at the end of the day, after 8 or 10 hours of that, it's mind numbing. But as far as perspective, what I learned as I went out into the market was that I was kind of an aardvark. I mean, there aren't many winemakers that are the farmer, and honestly, and I think all of the customers think that that's the case. But I just realized the more I went out, the less I really, let's see, my peers, were just totally different people, and they didn't get what I was really digging on, which is, my making soil. I mean, and for most people in the wine industry, it's all about the wine. And, we can talk all day long about a wine, and that's great. I mean, it's great that there's a farm good that can happen with, and it can happen in the ultimate high level conversations, people spending the most money. But, I come from a farm family. So my great grandfather came here in the 1870s. And so I grew up sort of idealizing that. And my grandfather was the guy I wanted to be like. And that was just a different, nobody that I ran into had that similar experience. A couple people later did. So, my perspective of the industry is really limited based on that, of being that person, to be honest. I mean, really, let's just be honest. If you're a young, hot, natural wine brand, you're a marketer. I mean, that's what it takes to get it done.
Yeah.
Promoter and a marketer, and there's no time for farming. And so, those people do well, and they're well known, and people think that whatever they think about me at times, and it's like, well, I don't have the time. Actually, I mean, let's be honest. I didn't have the right vision. If I were to go speak at business school, it would be everything you shouldn't do. I mean, literally, my vision was, hey, I can do it. I can make wine. Grew up making wine. I grew up in grape farming. I was like, I don't have to pay someone to do that, so I can save money. I can start a business cheaply. And that all was true, but the interface with customers, the marketing, the outreach that it takes wasn't even on my vision,
Right.
Typical,
right.
Up here, we read a lot about people in wine. There's just so many wineries, and people are always like, I didn't realize it took so much effort to sell, and stuff like that, comes up, and
Right.
it's true. And so,
yeah,
so that was my path. It's skewed, but from that perspective, the reason why I wanted to display that perspective is that it was the years 1998 to about, I don't know, 2012, something like that. Really difficult times. Two big downturns, had 9/11 and then had the '08 crisis. And it was somewhere after '08 that natural wine, was a term and a thing, and people were choosing it. And I was so excited because I'd had years and years and years of beating my head against the wall, and not getting as good of results as if I was a marketer or a promoter. But promotion's not really my forte. I'm not the best at that. I like to have discussions. I like to farm, and I like to create something that is, what I think that place can do best. You know what I mean? Like, it's respective of the place, instead of some, winemaker idea of what a wine should taste like. I more want to shepherd my wines. And so when Natural Wine came here, I was so excited, and all these, meetings, and they're like focus sessions of the customers that I want to have. But then I felt like from the farming perspective, I felt like I got locked out of the gates to, Eden in a way, because, I mean, let's be honest, natural wine's sort of a style at the moment. I mean, I can make all the orange wine and chillable red, and like that I can sell. And if I was into carbonic maceration, that's really what's moving. And so the stuff that I was doing, longer élevage, more cannon, it just was an aardvark, and still tough for the market to move some of that. So we shifted, and now I make wine more for the market, but I still have my artistic direction. But that was my perspective was skewed, and there were many years where I was just like, man, I'm getting out of this. This doesn't work for me. And Meeting Isabel was was she came here at kind of a rough time, and that really helped. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, just just to get fresh energy, get me out of the doldrums of the experiences, the limited experiences that I was having, and see a different way, and then be invited along the path, instead of sort of forgotten, and so that was good.
No, you're talking about Isabelle Legeron?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, wrong one. Okay, yeah, I didn't know. I didn't know if you were married to
Sorry,
Isabelle.
no, I mentioned her earlier, and I think I was referring to her there, but in my head,
Yeah. Just making sure. No,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
clarify. If I mention Wendy and how she came along and changed my life at just the right time, I'm not talking about somebody in wine. That's actually my wife.
Well said.
But no, this is great. I mean, I do agree. I mean, I've sort of talked about this actually in the past about how natural wine is. I mean, what it claims, like if you ask for a definition or the guidelines, there's no stylistic guidelines for natural wine, but in reality, in the market, it is absolutely a style.
Right.
And yeah, you're right. I mean, I hope, and I want I want to be like, yeah, hang on, because I feel like that wheel's got to come around for you at some point. Like what you're doing, I don't know. I don't know if it's the next phase. I'm no Nostradamus, but I just feel like there will be a place for it soon. I'm thinking, because it is, like you said, the way that you approached it, it's not a trend based. It's based
Right.
on the earth. It's based on the farming. It's based on this approach that is integrated into an agricultural perspective, and I I see that coming for you. That's the best I can do, but I do see that coming for you. I think that is really a beautiful way to approach it, and I want to get into more of that actually, and what that means to you. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about
Sure.
your vineyards.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Well, let's talk. You said I like this too. You said maybe before the vineyards,
yeah.
because that's maybe the thing that we put on top of the thing that's most important. But um, you were talking about you're a soil builder, and
Yeah.
I've actually joked with a couple of people I should rename this the secret name of this podcast is the Ecological Soil Podcast, even though it's called the Organic
Love
Wine
it.
Podcast.
I love that.
So please let's start with the soil. And what do you mean when you say you're a soil builder? I mean, you literally are a soil builder, because you have the soil carbon management company that you just founded recently, and you're building primordial biome. If you want to talk about that,
Yeah.
but maybe you also want to talk about what you meant. I think you meant that metaphorically as well as literally.
We
If you want to.
It's all one, actually.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
because one comes from the other. You're talking about the offspring and the
Right, right.
offspring. So it
The
goes
chicken and the egg. Yeah.
right, right. It goes back to the vineyard, because I had a day job that I subsidized my winery with. I was managing about 115 acres of wine grapes for a bigger winery, and that's kind of how I started the winery, using their equipment. And then that kind of got sold in a real estate deal, and I was just starting to farm my own little stuff. And that was about 2008. I got the opportunity to farm some of the vineyards that my great grandfather actually planted, over there on Martinelli Road. Martinelli is my family. They have a winery here in Sonoma County, and over there in Forestville, there's two blocks that were planted by Giuseppe Martinelli, who's my great grandfather, and I had the opportunity to farm them. Now, I went in for it, but what I noticed was they had Eutypa, so one's about 80 years old, the other one's 120 years old, so planted in 1890 or 125, whatever the math is on that. And
Wow.
I was just, excited to be in what I call the Martinelli Valley farming this heritage that was my own, which was never planned. But then what I noticed was it was in pretty severe decline. Eutypa alata is the name for a pathogen that creates old vine decline. It's a dwarfing disease. They also call it dead arm, and arms just die. And a lot of the arms hadn't been cut off, and that's an inoculum. So we did a lot of sanitation those first years. and
Now,
still.
can you? I was going to ask you to go into a little more detail about Utaipa. Can you also spell it so that anybody who wants to look it up can?
Yeah, sure. It's I'll give my best shot. It's
This
EUT.
is a test.
Yeah, I know, right? You let me know. You give me a grade at the end. Hopefully I do well. No, but it's EUTYPA, and then the last part's Lata. That's the second, the genus and species. Species is LATA, Eutypa lata. It's a fungus, infects the vascular system of the plant, and so
And that
yep.
comes from pruning cuts, right? If
Yeah,
I'm correct,
yeah,
right?
I mean, especially pruning in the rain, which I've had to do on
Mm,
occasion. It's that you wouldn't think so. You think the rain would wash inoculum off. It actually washes it on. I don't fully
mm.
understand that, but it does. We use organic product to put on the pruning wounds the day we do them, so that they
Like
don't.
Vitaseal? Is that
Yeah,
do you use
Vitaseal's the one
Vitaseal?
we used to.
Vitaseal?
Yeah, that's the paint. We use that. There's another one. Um, Forget the name right now. There's like a beeswax type product where you just kind of can put your finger on it and cover it. That's nice
Oh,
too, but the Vitaseal is a little quicker.
okay, got it.
Yeah,
Yeah, just dab, 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 dab,
yeah,
right as you go down.
exactly. With a glove, it's a little easier because it's sometimes the paint's pretty watery, and so you can touch a wound with a brush, but only half of it actually gets the material on it, and so it takes a little bit more care. Um,
Got it.
yeah. Anyway,
Well, I mean, and I'm digging into this because it's fascinating to me, but and anybody hopefully who's farming, it's very educational and important to know. But are there areas in California or any other that you know of that are more prone to that, or is it pretty much anywhere? I mean,
oh,
are there environmental conditions that that make it that you have to be a little more careful
well, I
in those
think
areas?
our desert areas, Central Valley, South, probably less indices there.
Right.
Where you've got more moisture, fog, cooler climate, that just favors
Tip,
all fungus in
right.
general. And we
Got it.
see that with powdery mildew. This one's no different, and especially since its life cycle occurs during the winter. So that if you got a dry winter in the desert, that's probably the only benefit is you don't get a lot of Eutypa, but probably limited growth from
Right.
lack of rain. But it's a good trade off.
Right. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So sorry, you were working with old vines. Let's
Yeah.
get back to I'll try to not interrupt as
No
much, but that was
worries.
fun.
I've taken some notes so I can keep track of where I'm at. Because
Excellent.
I'm old now. I'm 52. I don't remember everything as well as I used to. but
Right there with you.
but anyway, so these as I was observing these old vines, it wasn't just the vines that were in decline; it was the soil. Like I couldn't get a
Mm.
1 foot cover crop, and I was like, "What the
Oh
hell,
wow.
happened here?" And I've been a no-till farmer since 1997, and strictly, I don't, I've
Yeah.
never owned either at my day job or for myself. I've never owned tillage equipment, and that's been I don't know 23, 24 years. So I've kind of forgot what I knew earlier about the what happens with tillage, and then it started to illuminate for me here, where these are old vines. There's no trellis, so they're cross tilling. And when you cross till, you mean you till one way and then you do 90 degrees. You till the other way. So every part during that tillage, or there are parts that are tilled twice actually in the same moment,
Right.
and you can
Right.
see those depressions in there. They're permanent. And I was viewing this, and I was viewing no soil. That's just what we would call subsoil. Subsoil is not topsoil and doesn't promote plant growth really well. And some people think it doesn't matter because old vine roots are down 60 feet. That's pretty damn far. But there's no life at 60 feet. That's what people have to remember. See, plants don't they don't absorb minerals on their own. It's a
Right.
key component, and so they need help either from bacteria or water. And what we're doing today, in my opinion, in conventional farming, is hydroponic farming in a soil medium, and it's all
Right.
fertigation. And without it, those plants die because the soil's dead. I was viewing dead soil, and so what brings life back to the soil? There's only one thing that brings life back: carbon. You can spray microbes all day long and do some other cool things, compost teas, all that. But if you aren't putting real carbon back in the soil, it's going to take a long time for those microbes to have a home because they die. The sun is on the soil. Anyway, I mean, I could talk for too long on that, so I'll curb it. But getting carbon back in is the key. And so at that time, I started to look around. My budget was zero. I just gotten out of my day job and I didn't have a lot of money, and I was starting this thing. And so I found a bunch of guys that do tree work, and that's a good carbon source. It's not a good nitrogen source, and I started composting this material, and it's not easy to work with. You got to kind of know it. It takes a good year plus to break down. But we were using fungi to inoculate or we were inoculating the wood chips with fungi, and then the fungi grow. Now the fungi are the key because the soil food web is coined by Elaine Ingram up in Oregon. Mm-hmm. That was back in the late 90s. She's the first one that really illuminated for the farming community what the soil life actually was. I mean, I got a bachelor's degree in viticulture and a master's degree in winemaking, but it's also in plant science. And we were never taught, even at graduate level, about the soil food web. That all came from Elaine Ingram, and we thank her. And so, but none of that, for that life to come to your soil, there's got to be carbon. Without it, you've just got a mineral substrate. And so, but when you add the fungi are the great middleman, and I call them the house dealer. The house wins both ways, right? They win coming and going. They get paid no matter what. And so do the fungi. So the roots. Just a quick basics here. The roots have ectomycorrhizal and endomycorrhizal fungi, also known as arbuscular mycorrhiza, and they hook onto the roots and permanent. I mean, they are part of the plant. They're an outreach of the plant. And what I tell everybody is that using this material with the fungi on it, the fungi get on the roots and then double the root system. That makes the plant more resilient. We never saw the results more than we saw last year, which was 2021 was the biggest drought I've seen in my lifetime, 50 years, and certainly during my farming tenure, the biggest that I've ever seen. And we had a bumper crop on the 80 and 120-year-old vines. People, were shocked at how much, we picked out there. And that's the beautiful, really back to Fukuoka, Masamoto Fukuoka, who wrote the One Straw Revolution in the 70s. Excuse me. He said, do less or do nothing, really is what he said. But people tend to take that literally. That's not what it means. You still got to chop wood and carry water. but if you target your efforts, then the whole system, and treat it like a system, the whole system needs less effort. And what I was doing was, spending a lot more time and energy building the soil material, putting it out there. It takes a lot of labor. People questioned whether it was valuable, worth it. But then when it's on the soil, it inoculates or regenerates life. And so then you have all these other opportunities. We don't need, we get better vigor in the plant. We don't need to spray as often. And at this point, I don't spray those with any pesticides. I used to dust sulfur. I don't even do that. I only use sesame oil for powdery mildew, and a little foliar fertilizer in there with it to bolster these old guys.
Really?
Yeah.
Sesame oil.
Yeah. There's a product on the market called Organicide. I get it from Peaceful Valley Farm Supply. They're a good supplier. And it's sesame oil, fish oil, and then a few other things. And I usually tank mix it with some type of seaweed-based fertilizer.
Like a foliar, okay.
Yeah, and boy, the plants love it when I spray that, because it's doing two things. It's killing powdery mildew in a natural way, and even some insects that aren't good, like leaf miners, but not killing bees. And so,
is it smothering the leaf miners?
Yeah.
Is that the deal?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It smothers those guys.
That's fascinating. That's great. I got to look into that.
Wow. What we saw was that the whole system came back to health, came back to life. So we didn't have to do as much, except for we had to mow more and more often,
Right.
because now we're sequestering an
Well,
incredible amount of carbon into that grass.
so and don't the cover crops are also, isn't photosynthesis a way to get carbon into the soil too, right? Any living plant will be bringing that carbon out of the air and putting it down in the roots for the mycorrhizae, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
was
Let's just do a
that.
basic on that real quick, because there might be people in the audience that don't know. But so there are a number of ways to get carbon in the soil. The best is photosynthesis is by far the only way to get it out of the atmosphere. So when carbon dioxide goes into the plant, it creates plant matter, right? All of the plant structure, whether it's a tree or a grass stem, is carbon from the atmosphere. It is nothing else but that. And thank God for photosynthesis, because that's how they do it, right? And during that process, so they're taking carbon and they're making it substrate in their body, but they're also sending glucose, which is 6 carbon chains, down the root system, and that feeds the microbes. So that's like having your own herd, right? And so they put it down there, and I call it, the fungi love it because they eat off of that glucose, and then they also stick it out because they're the furthest out from the plant, and then they interact with the bacteria. I call it the bacteria come for little glucose kisses, and then they go back out. The bacteria are the nutrient cyclers, so they go out, get minerals which the plant can't get on its own. See, bring it back, and when they're kissing the glucose kisses, they lose the plant fleeces them, or the fungi fleeces them of their minerals, and they go back
Right.
for more minerals in a cycle, and it works beautifully when the soil's alive. And
But
yeah,
I
yeah,
I was just listening to a scientist recently describe this. Just to sort of, one of the things that I love, these sort of beautiful moments of admission, when science crosses into that threshold. But it was when they were trying to define bacteria and fungi, especially in the soil. It was soil scientists, and how the only way that they could really define them was by their relationships. So there, they began to realize that they couldn't separate them from, like, there weren't these indistinct things, like the entire system is alive as a thing. And I guess, if you translate even bigger, extrapolate that, it gets to encompass all of us, really, if you
yeah.
think about it. Right. But I love how our language leads us to try to, create separation. But
That's right.
when you start, I love when you reach the end of the limits of our language, when you're trying to actually nail down the isness of something, and you run into just, the failure of our language to sort of capture the complex and beautiful web that is the totality of this thing that we're dealing with and working with.
Perfectly
um
said.
but okay, so that sounds so. And you're still farming the vineyards that you started farming back then, right?
Yeah, yeah, and more. I farm a bunch of
Right.
little sites. They're just, just little places that are kind of special. And
Now,
go ahead.
did you acquire them by purchase? Are you leasing? Are you just doing a favor for something that's been abandoned otherwise, or
Yep.
what's the how, or,
Mostly that, but it's honestly, the only thing I own is the winery site, which has an acre vineyard. It has about a half acre where I make the soil material, and then the tasting room and winery. But everything
oh,
else, because land's just so expensive up here, is really stuff that no one else wants to farm. It's too small.
right,
That kind of thing. I meet a lot of owners. Not all owners are good partners. So I've learned to, unfortunately, the hard way, but I've learned to pick and choose, and also, try to get the right varietal, but or the right blend. But yeah, so I think I
right.
farm like 6 or 7 different little plots today.
Oh, wow. So, just a question for anybody who might want to do what you're doing. What are the hallmarks of a good owner, and that somebody that you could have so what to look for in
uh,
establishing that kind of relationship, building that relationship?
Oh my God. Well, I mean, really, that's just any relationship, right? Like, I've learned, certainly after I got my divorce, I really had to to learn, like, what does it mean to seek, a good, what does it look like? What's a good partner for me?
Right.
So, and that's been, a long time of seeking that everybody, probably has to answer that for themselves. But the criteria for me are, the person has to care, if they don't care, then that could be good that they leave you alone, but then it could
Right.
also be, there's a reason for not caring. And sometimes that is a problem. And I can't
Yeah.
think of an example, but I know that is true. And then there's others that care too much and get all in your stuff. And then there's those that want to control it, and they want to control it through you, and they want you to do what they want to do. And I never go for that anymore.
Right.
But the best thing to do is not be desperate. I mean, honestly, all the mistakes I've
Yeah.
made were just from desperation, and nobody needs to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, when I find myself saying, "Oh, they'll trust me later," or stuff like that, those that kind of language in the head is really just trying to explain away what your inside feelings not working. And some people are really good at that. I had to learn it as a skill.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
No, me too. I know, and I feel that. Um, that's good. Okay, so great. So, l- um, please tell us some of the stuff that these grapes that are in these vineyards. I mean, are they all? I mean, yeah. Tell us about some of them or all of them. The vineyards, what they're like, what the grapes are,
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
my favorite thing these days is blending. I really, I mean, I think I originally got in the market to make the best varietal, but that was with the mindset that the market had then. I mean, the varietal market just came in between the 50s and the 70s. That's really when varietal wine became a thing, and it only became a thing in the U.S., not elsewhere. And
I know it's so weird and it's so unsustainable as you know what I mean? Like anybody that listens to this podcast will have heard this before, but just the idea that we're stuck with these things regardless of what happens to the climate or it's hey, why can't it just be a place? Like I noticed that you named some of your wines from of the vineyard basically or yeah, I believe that's true.
yeah,
And I love that idea. Like, why can't that be enough?
that's right.
And then that vineyard can adapt and change and continue to evolve throughout time. And in 100 years, hopefully, it won't be the same grapes being grown because
Hmm.
newer, better. Because somebody will have cared for it and loved it, and that means a process. It doesn't mean you've arrived at any point. Anyway, I'll shut up.
Yeah, well,
Sorry.
well said. I mean, it's just, I think for me, it was simply a pathway of the palate, honestly, which is how I got to natural wine
Interesting.
anyway. Because,
Yeah.
when I was growing up drinking my grandfather's wines, I didn't know that they were natural. I thought all wine was natural. And there
Right.
was no question, there was no thinking that it wasn't or it was. It just was. It just was a thing that was unto itself. I didn't see two different classifications. And when I got into the master's degree at Fresno State, I was like, holy shit, they're just teaching me to do manufacturing. Like, that's all
Yeah.
this is. Write work orders. I'm going to sit in a desk job. That's horrible for me.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I went there to learn, to do it. That was one of the reasons why I went to Fresno at that time, which was in the late '90s. Davis didn't have their winery yet and all that. And so anyway,
Yeah.
Fresno did, and so then I started to, I was doing the techniques that I was learning, and I wasn't liking the results from one yeast. And I was even using a native yeast that was isolated from what's called the William Sellium slant, which came from the Lino Martinelli Jackass Hill, that was made in the barn that I now own. This was where William Sellium Winery started out at the place that is now Old World Winery. And
Oh wow.
yeah, and that was a piece of history for me, and that wasn't a plan to buy that either. It just sort of happened. And even with that as an isolated native yeast, I still didn't love the singular character. And a friend of mine at school at the time, Jeff Cohn, was doing natural wines or doing his thesis on natural wines, and I was learning from him that there's actually 25 species in a natural ferment. Plus, I mean, it's not
Right.
it's not limited. It takes a lot of effort to find out exactly how many are there, and they all
Right.
have different life bell curves. And so then, as I started to drink more with that in mind, my palate likes complexity because that's what I grew up drinking was natural wine complexity. I don't want one yeast. And then I started to learn that that's the same for varietal with me. I like the complexity. I don't want a singular. My palate gets kind of bored on the third sip. So so then I just started to make wines that way. At first, it was all varietal because you have to go with this Zinfandel. There's no way to talk. What is it? It's like, well, it's a blend. Okay, well, that's going to go in the blend section, which is all cheapo stuff. So couldn't do that. But now we've got, for instance, Gota Gao, one of the most expensive and popular natural wines, amazing stuff, and they're virtually all field blend. And some of these, there's others, and I can't think of at the moment, but I just love that. And so I've been, embracing that these last, I think I've been making, trending towards more blends this last 10 years. And, my palate just does like them. And I definitely, like you mentioned, I try not to mix vineyards unless I have to. I always like to taste the vineyard. And if I can get a couple varietals, that's even better. But I'm mixing vineyards now with some of the bigger blends because, let's be honest, the markets, expensive wine doesn't really sell well in natural wine unless you're got a gal. But so the cheaper stuff has to be kind of blend a mix of vineyards, and I like that too. I'm really happy with what we're putting out in the market right now.
So when do you do that blending? Is it when you bring the grapes in, or when you're blending barrels at the end?
Yeah, the way I explain that is there's a synergy, right? So when you blend as barrels at the end or right the day of bottling, which I'll do, at times because I don't, not all grapes are ready at the same time to blend as fruit.
Right.
Right. And that's fine. But typically what you get is 1 + 1 = 2, when you blend as wine, right? And that's cool. But I like to have 1 + 1 = 3. There's a synergy there. And I've done this a number of times. I used to get 5 varietals from one vineyard, and I would make them all separate, and I would co-ferment some, and then I would taste the co-ferment against the same level of blending, usually Petit Syrah and Zinfandel, and make that blend. And so I had it from the same vineyard, same block, either co-fermented or not co-fermented. And, the not co-fermented, meaning different varieties together. I know natural wine market tends to think co-ferment means, wine and cider at the moment, but that term used to be, multiple varieties. And so I still say co-ferment as, multiple varieties. And they just always taste better. There's something more generated. There's a synergy that creates a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. So you get 1 + 1 = 3, and that's what I try to bring to the customer.
That's nice. Yeah. How can you talk about some of that? Yeah. Some of what you're doing in the winemaking, especially like how do you approach the winemaking? Let me ask a specific question to get you rolling. How you so at least on your website you say you do add a little sulfur in barrel. I'd be curious about the timing of that, and then I'm still guessing since you're going minimal, and with any wine you want to be protective. What are the things that you find are the most important in keeping the wine from going into a bad direction, from getting a spoilage microorganism bloom?
Yes, good one. Well, the sulfur I use in the shepherd way. So, if I need to steer a wine, I'll use sulfur to steer it.
Right. So it's not just by recipe, like every wine at 3 months in barrel gets a dose of whatever. It's like you're monitoring it, you're analyzing it and seeing how it's progressing. And
maybe... talking about sulfur just for a minute, it's been, fairly demonized in the natural wine group, which is fine. And it deserves that. And, because most conventional wineries are hitting the grapes with 30 parts per million of sulfur to kill the incipient fermentation. And so it comes in with 30 parts just to the crusher. Then, as soon as it moves again, they'll hit it again, and they hit it at every step that it moves, and then they maintain it during storage at 50 to 100. I mean, some of the whites can have 400 parts per million sulfur. Like that, that's going to be obnoxious to drink for some of us that are sensitive, which I am.
Yeah.
So, for me, I I use it to steer it. So I want the wine to be fermented. I don't ever want to have to give it sulfur during the fermentation process. After that, if it's going a direction that I don't like, I'll hit it with a little bit of sulfur, like 5 parts per million, 10, something like that, and just kind of steer it around and see how it progresses. And then at bottling, I'll hit it with 30 is what I like to have in the wines at bottling. I think it helps make them more shippable. I get less complaints from wholesalers. I just that's kind of like my recipe. 30 parts really works for me, and that's not noxious to the system at all. In fact, it might be even negligible a lot of the time. If you add sulfur on the lees, which I and we'll talk about that. I store on the lees in the barrel. The lees eat up the sulfur.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're adding, are you adding 30, or you want to get to, I mean, is that a 30 total, and then
Yeah.
your free is going to be much less than that? You might even have zero free
Yep.
after going through the
Yeah,
bottling process, right?
mostly I got zero free. 30 to 50 max total.
Right.
You know,
Got it.
and
Like if you've had to add a little, then you just add a little
yeah,
bit more at
but
bottling,
but
and then,
there
yeah.
there might be a barrel or two that got close to 50, but usually a whole blend. I'll do an ad that's maybe 20 parts per million. I think that's the biggest ad I'll ever do at one time.
Okay.
And that's giving me some room if I did a 5-part ad before or a 10-part ad. So I got 2 ads then I can do. And I'll do that at bottling, or if I had to add a lot more, then I'll just do a little bit at bottling because there's already some in there, even though the microbes and the lees have eaten up the sulfur and it's at zero, and can actually qualify for under 10 parts per million sulfur, so that you don't have to put it on the label. But
Right.
that gets complicated when it's on there, and
Yeah.
when do I put it on, when do I not? And so we just the artwork is the artwork. We just leave it saying contains sulfur.
Yeah. I mean, even if you added zero, it would probably contain some sulfites, just naturally, right?
Only
That's
if you sprayed sulfur in the vineyard, but you can actually get. I
ah,
mean, you can get hydrogen sulfides from yeast, and especially in
right.
certain varietals. But I don't, in my mind at the moment, know that actually translates into sulfur later.
Yeah.
That would be
I
measurable.
don't.
I'm not
Right.
sure about that, but usually all measurable sulfur comes in from spraying sulfur is really the worst because it's micronized, so it's soluble. So everything, and I learned this the hard way. I had a friend that I was making wine from his grapes, and he missed his dilution by 10 or 20 times. Just way too much
Oof.
sulfur on this thing, and it came in, onions and garlic. We had to dump it. It
Oh
wasn't it
no.
wasn't savable, and so
Oh
you can
no.
destroy a wine with too much sulfur in the vineyard. Does for sure.
So, I just to give anybody perspective who isn't familiar with winemaking chemistry, when you're talking 5, 10 parts, this is like nothing. I mean, if you're in a conventional winery, you probably won't hear numbers lower than 50 parts per million ads.
Yeah,
Like that.
as an
That's
ad,
like, as an ad.
right?
I'm just gonna, yeah. We start with 50.
Yep.
We're gonna add another 50 here, and
Yep.
then we're gonna, we'll do another 50 to 80 to 100 at bottling or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, just so people have that perspective. We're talking tiny, tiny ads that you're doing. Um, Great. So then, okay, good that we dug into sulfur. I like that. Now, about what other, aside from, I mean, obviously that's sort of a shepherding, protective thing that you do. I think I have the same philosophy. Like only use it if it's necessary, and you're monitoring. What are you doing so you can use as little as possible? I mean, what actually makes the most difference because this is the unsexy part of making natural wine
Ah,
to some degree, right?
yeah,
Like the how do you actually keep it stable without without adding anything, basically.
yeah, that's great. Well, first and foremost, right, clean grapes. That's the best. Bird damage is one way that spoilage comes in a big way.
Yeah, yeah,
Pediococcus comes in that way pretty strong, and so clean grapes, even from molds, which molds don't typically, they're not going to grow in the wine necessarily, but if they've impacted the grapes, then you'll have that flavor. And something about high mold indices, I saw this at my day job, makes a wine more spoilable when the grapes were spoilable. Um, we really saw
got it.
that, and yeah. So let's see where else.
I mean, have you had any instances where, I mean, obviously starting with the grapes, right, is number one. But let's say we've moved. You've got nice, clean,
Yeah.
beautifully grown grapes
Yep.
with a nice, healthy population because you haven't done any, crazy spraying in the vineyard. So you have a healthy population of, microbes on the grapes. You bring them in. Have you found, have you found something happen where you had to sort of track down, like, why am I getting so much VA in these wines, and then you tracked it down to this or that type thing,
Yep.
or I don't know,
Yep.
just curious about
Oh
those
yeah,
kinds of
that's
things.
always. I mean, I think I've made 100 at this point, about 160 different wines in 23 years,
Uh-huh.
and some of them didn't make it like we hoped, and there can be so number two. So number one is clean grapes. Number two is clean equipment. I mean, I always laugh. People romanticize winemaking, and I get interns here, and they're always sort of bemused that basically it's just glorified janitorial service. I mean, that's all we do, right? Clean
Yeah,
stuff,
it's just cleaning.
right?
You clean before, you use it, you clean after.
That's
Yeah.
it. And so, that's the other way, but then there can be bad bugs that come, and I call, wine bugs, I call them bugs just to make it easy, but they're either bacteria or yeast. Pediococcus is one of them that, if all your fermentables are gone, which would mean sugar and malic acid, then, the wine's pretty stable. That's when I bottle. I mean, the natural wine market, I think, got a black eye when people were bottling too soon, and there was something fermentable still in there, and we got mousiness, and that's just typically has been a bottling tune problem. But it doesn't
Mm,
seem like it's happening as much anymore, so people seem to got it under control. But
yeah.
so mousiness can come in. So I like to get those fermentables done. But pediococcus is one that can ferment, a wine that's got solids in it, and that's tricky for me because I don't filter. So
Yeah.
we've had that one show up a couple times, and it's cool. I mean, the wine tastes like blood oranges. I mean, it's definitely a flavor, but
Right.
but it's not how you wanted it.
Right.
Yeah, and,
Now,
yeah.
and do you ever have VA issues?
Oh yeah, sure.
And is that just an oxygen control situation, or is that cleanliness? And let's dig into the cleanliness. How anal are you about cleanliness?
Oh my God. If you saw my place, you'd be like, what the hell is this? It's a glorified garage, and all of my winemaking is outside. I have no covered areas. So,
Got it. Got it.
it's pretty, but that's how I learned, the space that I took over at Everett Ridge, which was my day job back in the day. It was this really cool piece of history, this building that was built in 1850 or 1870 rather. And I was using this space that they were using as a trash dump, basically. And they allowed me to use the space because it was separate from their main crush pad. And then my weird stuff wouldn't cross contaminate theirs. They like that idea. And so I did it. So I learned how to make, wine with insulated bins, and it works really well outside. So there's no frills here. We do have good sanitation equipment. I use chemicals as little as possible. Mostly we're using really hot water, almost steam, and we do use steam. We rent it for the barrels. But those are key, and we just want everything. It's got to be visually clean. I'm not doing.
Yeah.
Some people analyze their sanitation stuff and hire people to come consult, and I don't do that. But so I'm not anal about it. I think there's a certain amount. I mean, if you ever had microbiology, which I did in graduate school, I mean, it just freaks you out about everything, you know?
Right.
So my view,
Nowhere is safe.
yeah, right. And so my view is just like, okay, let's go. This piece. It's hard to contaminate stainless steel if it's been washed and cleaned
Right.
properly. It's just really hard.
Yeah.
And also
Okay.
sometimes it's clean and it gets hung up on something that's dirty, and there's just simple things that we do, um, and we're not nearly as quote unquote sanitary, as most manufacturing plants. I mean, it's a literal hospital in there, and I mean, they treat it like a hospital too. I think that's a bit excessive, and plus, I mitigate my needs for cleanliness with my needs for less chemicals. See, I think that's really key. And my needs
Yeah.
for using less water. So we try to target, do the right thing, clean it in the right moment, so it's not drying on there and sitting overnight and stuff like that. That requires more work.
Right. Right. Okay. I like this. I know it's like I said, it's not the sexy part of winemaking, but it's I think super important that I don't know. I love hearing it. I love hearing other winemakers' approach to these things too. I think I skipped giving you the opportunity to talk about some of the grapes that you're working with, specifically one grape. I want to make sure you get a chance to mention this grape that you work with that is grown. You're working with the only version of it in North America,
Yeah,
or in the new world potentially, like maybe all of the Americas.
yeah. Abouriou, it's a theoretically a Basque varietal that they don't really even know the true parentage. I guess Jose Villama, who co-wrote Jancis Robinson's book Wine Grapes, said at Raw way back in 2014 or 15 that Abouriou was found on the side of a castle, and it was already in antiquity and then brought back into the fray. So who knows, where its true parentage is, but that variety came in the 1800s here to the U.S. It was called Early Burgundy, still legally by that name. I have to put that on the label, even though we know,
Oh wow.
yeah, we know by DNA it's Abouriou. Um, it's crazy, dealing with the TTB on those kind of the Tax and Trade Bureau is really,
Yeah.
getting label approvals is really an eye-opening experience. And so it was planted in field blends up until Prohibition and maybe a little bit after Prohibition, but then completely being replanted with the onset of the varietal market, which between the 50s and 70s, probably more like the 70s. Then growers got paid more for Cabernet Sauvignon. They're like, what am I doing with this stupid early Burgundy or Abouriou? You can't even say Abouriou, so farmers pull it out and put something else in. But my family kept this block. So the way that story goes is the 120-year-old field blend. We call it the 1890 block. That's when it was planted. It goes into the wine that's called Abundance, and it's an abundance of flavor. It's 7 varieties out there, well 6, that were all So you can imagine these immigrants here. They showed up. They went to work. Finally, they've got enough money to buy a piece of land, and then they cut the trees down, and then they can plant something. And so they go to the nursery to find out, because that's many years after they arrived. They got to go get cuttings from a nursery, and they didn't know what they were. So we can see my grandfather took this small plot and put 6 varieties. They're Muscadelle, which is a white, not actually a Muscat. It's also called Sauvignon Vert. Trousseau Gris,
Huh.
uh, and Palomino, which is also called Golden Chasselas. And then there's Mondouse Noir, Abouriou, and Zinfandel. So that was their let's try this out block. And then from that, they identified Abouriou and Zinfandel. Those are the 2 varieties we're going to plant more. And so they planted the rest of the valley with those, as did other immigrants. And then all of the Abouriou was gone, including most of it that was in that valley, except for my little block. It's the last contiguous planting of Abouriou in the U.S. I mean, I've given some clones to people, but it's the last one, especially as old vines. It does exist in old vine vineyards. A vine here, a vine there, but those are they're field blended.
Right. So what's it like? I mean, how could you describe it?
Well, It's the most interesting variety I work with because it can do so many things, but it's got a low value because it's rustic. So if you take it to a really tannic degree, it's a big tannic rustic thing that's got to be
Got it.
10 years in the bottle, before it's
Got it.
any good. Yeah. But you can also make a sparkling red Lambrusco style, which I do.
Okay.
And you can also pick it to be a chillable red, which is mostly how I do it now, to do that
Okay.
lighter style. And then maybe I'll take a ton or two and do extended maceration, which is just loaded with spice, and it's so beautiful. But extended macerations are hard to keep around. They can, they're even more risky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, what about the opposite? So that's one way to sort of essentially reabsorb the tannins, but can you press early and go to barrel sweet?
Yeah, I
To
typically do, to make the chillable red. It's light, it's like a rosé. But,
Okay.
really 1 or 2 days of maceration turns it red with this variety. So you got to be in hours or, really.
No, I meant like a red, but like, letting it start to ferment, but before you start extracting tons of tannins, that kind of thing. Like, just more a tannin control thing than like a stylistic thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
because it's rusticness, it tends to take on the characteristics pretty fast. Even
got
it's a
it.
heavy-bodied blending red, and
Okay.
so even 3 days, it's got a lot of tannin already.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, too much to make a light red with it, and so you pretty much have what I was trying to illustrate was you have a really narrow window of when you can take it down a different path other than red wine.
Got it. Okay. Got it. Yeah. It's not Tinterior, though. It's an actual.
No, but it's close. So
Got it.
yeah,
Okay.
Tinterior, colored juice for those that don't know, but the Abouriou, when you squeeze a berry, it squeezes out clear juice, but the more you squish it, the final juice is red. So any
Wow.
juice that's in contact with the inside of the skins is just immediately red. So it's riding a fine line there.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and then you had this sort of horrible thing happen. The Flow Vineyard was right in the path of the Tubbs fire too.
Yeah, 2017. That's right.
I'm sure you've had time to assess, and how's it doing?
Oh,
Is it,
well, I shed my tears already. It's gone. It didn't.
oh, wow.
Yeah, it didn't survive that. What I learned. So the mulch that we use, for the regenerative farming, that we band it. What in agriculture is called banding, which means you just put it on top of the soil in a band or in a lump of, maybe it's a long kind of hump. And so that was a trellised vineyard. So the whole length of the trellis underneath was mulch at about 6 inches high to maybe 18 inches wide at the most, and tapering
Right.
down. So it's only 6 inches at the middle, maybe it's 4. But so we're using that to grow these grapes, and we were resuscitating that vineyard. We've been farming it. That was the third year, and it was just coming into its own. I had to cut off a bunch of cordons, and we were retraining it to cane. And my guy Jose and I were excited that year because as it was growing, we were looking at it going, oh my God, we're going to lay down some big canes this year. Next year is going to be beautiful. 2018 is going to be beautiful. And
Uh,
what I didn't know or didn't ever think about is that mulch is flammable. No,
oh, no.
what a bummer. And it doesn't look flammable because it's moist. I mean, it literally stays moist year round, even in August, maybe not in September. It's dried out then. But and depending when the last rain was, but water wicks out of the soil, the mulch stops it. So you're losing soil moisture every day, but when you use mulch on top of this soil, you're stopping that loss, and that stays there for the vines. It's working for you, not against you, and that keeps it moist. So it just never occurred to me, even with that moisture, that it's flammable because it was the fires were hot and it was a rain of sparks. So everything got warmed up, dried
Wow.
up, even if it was any bit of moisture, and then it just completely incinerated. So when I arrived to the vineyard, when I could finally get in there, the sheriffs would let me in, and we'd picked it, so we got the crop. And I went in, and I was like, oh, phew, all the vines were there, and you could see them. The canes were there. Looked like we could prune them. And so I was like, great, okay, so we lost some energy by the leaves burning off, but we're still good. And then I started to look some more. I was like, wait, what's underneath that vine? It looks like I see light. And sure enough, they burned right off the roots because the mulch, it's like cooking your pork for 12 hours. It just, yeah, it
Wow.
burned them right off, and it didn't burn up or burn the rest of the vine. And I got the farm advisor over, and she was like, I've never seen a vineyard with 100% mortality. Usually just the edges burn, you lose 10% of your vines, but
Oh no.
yeah, so mulch farming, bit of a downer for that.
Uh,
So now what we do is we pull the mulch away from the actual vine so that,
got it.
if it's going to burn, it can sit there and smolder, but it doesn't have to burn the actual vine.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that vineyard is probably super fertile now. Did like massive biochar production.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and I think it did that next season. It had just a plume of growth. I mean, it was really something. I think whoever mowed it, for them to mow it. The situation for me was, I was helping a woman out whose husband had died. It was his baby. He had a little winery there and vineyard, and it was in duress when I took it over because he died suddenly during routine surgery, and so the whole time I was there, she was still sad because it was pretty fresh, his death. But then to lose her house and all of their old belongings, and she didn't have, her insurance hadn't been updated in like 40 years. It was a real loss for her. And she's like, you know what? I'm out of here. And I was like, I get it. I didn't have any money to replant anyway. So neither of us had money to replant. So she sold the land. I walked away. And that was it.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Got it. Well, I don't want to end on a bad note. Maybe I don't know if this is a good transition, but do you want to talk more about the soil carbon management company and the
Yeah.
primordial biome?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just,
It sounds like a really awesome project you started.
I appreciate that. Just a little bit about that, so from that experiment, the old vines regrew, and so then it just became every year I would make more and more and more, and then now I've got a ridiculous amount. And as it came the beginning, no, in 2020, Sonoma County did this thing called the biomass business competition. Biomass is anything that's plant material, and Sonoma County is generating an enormous amount of wood chips because of the fire fuel load removal efforts, meaning people are trying to make things more resilient, less fire. I mean, a grass fire is one thing. A forest fire has 60-foot flames. Grass fire maybe 10-foot. You can put that out.
Right.
60, you got to run. Even if you've got all this equipment for fire. So people are doing the trimming. You want to eliminate shrubs and brush from 0 to 12 feet. And then that'll save your big trees, and then the forests. And that's the way it was indigenously when the indigenous managed this country for 10,000 years. It was frequent fires, and there was never a super fire necessarily because they never had that much material to burn. And so that's generating a bunch of material. The county was looking for someone to figure out something to do with it. And I was like, well, what the hell? I do this already. Why don't I just throw my name in the hat? And I got a partner to help me write the business plan, because even though I own a business, I have no idea what a business plan is. Another mistake. And so come to find out, 6 months later, we won the thing. So we got a $50,000 grant to start to launch this, which means now we've got to, it's just an opportunity to spend more money. We got to spend $150,000 to get a permit and then turn it into a much larger operation. Our end goal is selling carbon credits, because getting something out of the services that we're providing with this agricultural method and healing these soils. And we've applied for an $80,000 grant from the Healthy Soils Initiative, which this is just what they want to fund, is farming like this. And so, those are exciting developments, and it all takes time and money. But I just love seeing the soil food web. Back to kind of how we started. Re-enlivened, regenerating. It's the fungi that are really the key to it, and it's just fun to watch this fungi, all this weird stuff come up, especially slime molds. If we were, on a Zoom right now, I'd show you a bunch of weird pictures, but that'll be another time.
It's funny. I here in LA. I don't know if this is like a national thing. I haven't even looked into it, but we have free woodchips.com. It's like free chip drop.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So the arborists, will just bring literally like a truckload, like, I don't even know how many like yards it is, but it's at least 10 yards of wood chips and just drop them in your driveway.
Yeah.
And you're like, great, my yard isn't even that big, And so I have literally like wood chip mulch on everything around our yard now, where there's not cover crops or gardens or where we're not trying to do other things, and then we even have piles. I'm composting them, and it was out in the street for a while. We had it like at the curb. I think our neighbors were starting to
love it.
Get a little, felt like we were just composting in the street.
So cool.
And then all of this crazy stuff started blooming out of it. And I was like, what? It's like these little orange globes, like microscopic orange globes that would create these crazy patterns. And I was like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And the word slime mold does not do it justice, because there are these beautiful, beautiful fungal things that take on these brilliant colors, and they're tiny. You have to go in and zoom in, and then you look, and the detail in them is incredible. And I was actually using like the iNaturalist app.
Yeah.
I just like I was like, what is this? And it was like slime mold. And then I started rabbit holing because of all the beautiful pictures of these things called slime mold. Yeah. So right there with you.
Yeah. You got to see it. It's funny for the public, dog vomit is the name of one of them. And so that gives you, the view of how it looks, right? But it's funny. I've got a picture of one that actually looks like a teddy bear. It is so bizarre. It came up in the shape of a teddy bear head mainly, and then they do these. And then if you smell it, it doesn't smell like dog vomit. It smells like truffles. It smells like good fungi. Apparently some of them are edible. I haven't tried it, but it does have a palatable smell. And it's, then that you've got a good heavy duty, and it's also primordial. That's where we got the name primordial biome for my product.
What does that mean? Yeah. What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, biome is just, a culture, a community of microbes. You got your microbiome in your gut. That microbiome that's in your gut mimics the soil microbiome. It's the same thing. It's, nature.
Right.
Nature doesn't, reinvent the wheel. It uses what it already has working. And so we just encapsulated that. Rudolf Steiner talks a lot about this. We encapsulated that in our stomachs in evolution. But the primordial biome, these fungi that are slime molds, they're also primordial because they haven't formed a fruiting body, a fruiting structure that we know as a mushroom. That's a higher form. That's a more recently developed species. And, fungi are the weirdest species, as you started to explain earlier. There's still some that aren't neither plants nor animals. They're kind of both. And they also evolved with plants. That's how they figured out that they could use plants and not have to be a plant, just be their own cool self. Freeload. Basically what they're doing, but they're also a communication highway. So the plants are communicating to each other through the fungal hyphae, the fungal mycelium. Paul Stamets talks a lot about that from Fungi Perfecti. Great website, fungiperfecti.com, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. Some great books out there. Mycorrhizae. Wait, no, something running.
Mycelium running. Yep.
Mycelium running. There you go. And then you also have Michael Phillips on the East Coast. In the north, so Paul Stamets Northwest, Northeast. Michael Phillips wrote Mycorrhizal Planet. Another great book if you're just looking into that kind of stuff.
Right on.
And while we're talking fungus, how do you pronounce? It's chitin, right?
Chitin.
Yes.
Yep, chitin.
Chitin, okay, because I for a long time pronounced it wrong. It's chitin.
Yep. That sounds more like Sanskrit.
Yeah. Okay. But there's a new I think it's called Back to Less, right? From Lallemand or one of the labs has created a product out of chitin that helps remove VA. So it's like natural. It's like without using some sort of filtration or something. It's a fining process that specifically removes like a bacterial bloom that could spoil your wine. Have you heard about that?
I do not know about that. That sounds
Okay.
super cool. If someone's, that's we would call that biomimicry, or using nature to work in nature.
Yeah.
I love that idea.
Yeah. I just found out about that too. I don't know how. I'm just researching weird esoteric wine stuff all the time, but but that was, I don't know. I'm not trying to plug the product. I don't know much about it, but just a fun thing about how we've barely tapped into the uses of these organisms, and there's this new thing that's being used for, and apparently with some success. It's been, I think there's a couple products actually, back to less and something else, and I think one actually is for Brettanomyces and the other is for VA.
Wow.
So you have a couple options of using a natural, just I think it's an Aspergillus mycelium is where they get the chitin and for this, and boom,
Well, that's
you got
interesting because Aspergillus niger is sour rot, and that's the worst rot. Like I'll take botrytis. I love. It's cool. We'll use that when we're fermenting. If I got it on Chardonnay somewhere, I did a botrytized Chardonnay a while back. But
right,
Aspergillus niger is a no non-starter. Can't have any zero of that because it does
right.
contaminate a whole blend. And so it's just interesting when, as soon as you say Aspergillus, I go, oh no, but that's cool. This is the mycelium,
Yeah,
not the.
you take the enemy and turn it into your friend.
That's it. That's it. I love it.
Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah. No, that's awesome. I love what you're doing. I can't wait to see how that happens. So can people, is it so far people can't buy the primordial biome from you? And I'm guessing this would be limited to Sonoma anyway. It's a Sonoma County project.
For now, it's small.
Okay.
What we're doing is I do it as consulting. So I've got a few other spots that I don't farm that are using the material, and we're using it with some landscapers because we're still sort of in the experimental phase until we're fully legal. You know what I mean? And so
Right.
so I do it as
Right.
consulting, and we can kind of sell consulting services, and then the mulch comes along with it. And I'm 80. Let's see, I'm 4 acres into an 80-acre conversion. So I took a fully conventional vineyard, and did a trial with them, and they were going to do a full conversion to regenerative. And for me, that's my best work. If I can convince
Yeah.
a conventional person who's spraying Roundup and using conventional products and tilling to go to a system like this, is a
So
real win.
they employed this mulch that you guys have created.
Yeah.
They stopped tilling in those 4 acres, and now they've been happy enough that they're going
Yep.
full in.
Oh yeah,
That's
and
amazing.
that's a lot of material. You use about 100 cubic yards per acre, and so I'm helping her make some there too. So it's not even that that it's just a money making operation for me. It's about change, and also
Yeah.
one farmer does it, other farmers do. So I got
Yeah.
skin in the game there, and so I consult there. I give a lot of time, and also I get grapes. So we'll trade consulting for grapes. So we have a great relationship, and we converted one block first, and now we're going onward. And we're talking about, $10,000 an acre Cabernet Sauvignon from Alexander Valley.
Wow.
Not typically what I'm working with, and I don't get to
Right.
get any of that out of there. I get the Merlot because no one wanted the Merlot, although now it's going up for high dollar too. But
Right.
she's got the
Yeah.
money, she's got good customers.
Right. Merlot is back.
Hopefully.
Well, and it's important to say we had a conversation on another episode about how sort of what's the word, how homogenous a lot of the products that people might put on their vineyard can be, and how they, there's like, some bit like a lumber company in the Northwest where you're getting all these sort of waste products to make a mulch, and then that gets distributed all along the West Coast. Whereas what you guys are making sounds like it's actually terroir driven, because you're cleaning out the forests right around there. So you're doing this public service, you're keeping it local, you're mitigating fire risk, which is a win, and then you are also increasing fertility and eliminating the need for conventional practices that are damaging to the soil. So it's just like quadruple winning all around.
Wow.
Sounds amazing.
I mean, I got to have to listen to this podcast because you just summed it up in one sentence perfectly, and it's true that the fungi, they're very locally related. I mean, as soon as you start studying these things, you realize how real terroir is, because the microbes change based on their environment, and that can be from vineyard to vineyard. But certainly if I'm making mulch here and I ship it to Massachusetts, that's, those organisms aren't going to survive as well as the ones that are there and have co-evolved with that climate.
Right. Not to mention the fact that you're sort of shooting yourself in your foot in the foot if you're trying to reduce carbon.
Exactly, right? That is the downside. The trucking is the downside to this operation, because it does take a lot. But we've got a big loader and we use big trucks, so it drops the shipping price and the amount of carbon. But it's necessary,
Yeah. Well, great. I mean, any final words? I mean, obviously, please share, how people can learn more and buy your wine and get in touch if that's
totally appreciate that. Sure. So, it depends where people are, but oldworldwinery.com is a great way to find me, see more about what I'm doing. If you're in LA, Nomadic Distribution has the wines there, and they're in a lot of places. It's probably I'm the most distributed there, and then maybe New York through Zev Selections. Just an amazing natural wine stalwart. He's a young old timer, and just a really knowledgeable fellow. And so that's one way to find the wines, support us. You can communicate with the website to catch us directly, and we can also help out finding local places or shipping something. And then if you want to learn more about the mulch, our website, we're developing a new one, but we've got information up there that works. That's called soilcarbonmanagement.com. And that tells a little bit about what we're doing there and where we're headed.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Darek. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for doing this. I mean, because you're doing this is how, our voices get amplified. And thanks for your interest. And just, even though I can sometimes be a little too much like a scientific presentation, but I like to know, the basics. And so I appreciate you, being interested in that too. Thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And I think that scientific element is very welcome. So that was great.
Cool.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.